The tech industry is dominated by men. In fact, women comprise only 15% of those working in technical roles in the tech industry. And our next guest says that number is only poised to get smaller. Joining us now to explain why, here's Sue Gardner. She's a journalist and former executive director of the Wikimedia Foundation. And it's nice to have you back here in Canada.
Thank you.
All the way from San Francisco.
I wish I could say it was great to be back here, but it's really
It's a little nippy, isn't it?
Yeah, I've lost my taste for it.
Well, let me take you back to what might be the good old or the bad old days, I don't know. This is 2007. You were working at CBC at the time. You left to go to Wikimedia, Silicon Valley, and all of the excitement that that entails. What was that transition from here to there initially like?
Yeah, it was super interesting, right? Because I had not spent a lot of time in the Bay Area or in Silicon Valley prior. And when I went to join the Wikimedia Foundation, we were located at the time down in Florida in St. Petersburg, but I moved the organization to San Francisco. And so when I first got there, I did a tour with a couple of good friends of Wikimedia who took me around to introduce me to rich people in the technology industry in the hopes that they would donate to Wikipedia, which is a nonprofit, and help fund our transfer into the Bay Area and our growth there. And I have to say, and you would know this because you know the CBC, I came from what was a very female-friendly environment. The CBC was really like a good place for women and a good place to be a feminist. Not perfect, but you know, I had great bosses and they were very, you know, openly feminist. Everybody was. And when I got to the Bay Area, the first thing I noticed, I did these 3 months of touring around, meeting rich people, and I didn't meet any women except women who were bringing us drinks in the boardroom and women who were booking our meetings. And I had this sort of feeling of unease, right? As I was going to all these meetings, it was sort of slowly dawning on me, something is a little weird, what is it? Oh, there's no women, well, maybe that's not that surprising. I don't know, they were probably really used to it. I'm used to it by now, right? But at the time, I was incredibly, I was startled because again, it was just totally new to me. And I was surprised. I kept waiting, you know, for a shoe to drop or something, and it never happened. And so I just found it very strange. And so I used to play this little game with myself when I was first out there, which was I was trying to figure out what year it was for women in Silicon Valley. Was it 1964? Was it 1985? Were they wearing pantsuits and little floppy ties? You know, where were we at? And ultimately, I mean, you can't fix it, but ultimately you can't fix it like that. That game does not really work. But ultimately, I felt like it was sometime around the early 60s, right? Like it was really pre-even a sufficient number of women to really make any noise about it, right? It was really, really early
So
days.
is it Mad Men culture?
Yeah, basically.
That kind of thing.
That's what it felt like. Yeah, it was really interesting.
They say, though, that Silicon Valley is the place in North American business which is a true meritocracy. If you've got the brains, if you've got the goods, doesn't matter what you are, you'll rise to the top. Is that your experience?
I don't think anybody believes that that's true anymore, right? I think that that's a thing that was said in the early days, and there may have been, through some lenses, there may have been some truth to it. Like I think sometimes about things like Wikipedia, right? Jimmy Wales founded Wikipedia. He didn't have a huge amount of money. He didn't, you know, get any special favors or whatever, and he was able to break through and make it really important, really popular and wonderful, right? So to the extent that that speaks to there having been a meritocracy or there being a meritocracy, sure, right? But I think that probably most people realize that a meritocracy is always going to be a myth. It's always going to be a story that you tell yourselves, right, about what you want to value. It's aspirational, right? And so I think it's fair probably to say that people in Silicon Valley would like to believe that they are analytical, that they are very, you know, very intelligent, that money perhaps doesn't matter, that your Ivy League education perhaps doesn't matter. That gets a little thin, right? But I think it's more a desire to want to believe that. I don't think anybody thinks that that's actually the case.
But this is a business that is replete with kind of young guys who've spent tons of time in front of computer screens coding, and I mean, I presume that hours and hours in front of screens does something. If your culture is made up of a bunch of people who are all like that, that's a particular culture, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there are shifting currents in the culture in Silicon Valley right now, right? Like when I got out there, and I would say even before I got out there, so maybe 2000 or something, right? I think that was more true then, right? And I think that we all know what tech culture and sort of geek culture looks like, right? And it's, you know, it's super analytical, it's super blunt, right? It's very high IQ, not so high EQ, right? Lots of social awkwardness, all that kind of thing, right? So we know what that looks like.
High intelligence quotient, very low emotional quotient.
Yeah, and it's not fair to say you can't really stereotype, but generally speaking, you know, what you said is true, right? If you spend all your time in front of the computer and you're deep, like speaking machine language to a machine, right? You
don't know how to talk to women.
Yeah, and you know, Jimmy Wales used to say about Wikipedia all the time, like the people who write Wikipedia are the people who are at home on Friday night writing an encyclopedia as opposed to at a party, right? So draw your own conclusions, right? So I think that's true. There's an aspect of geek culture that is very real in Silicon Valley. Though I would temper that by saying that more recently, in the past 10 years and especially the past 5 years, it has become the new Wall Street, right? And so there's a big influx of quants and people who are interested in. They're financially motivated. They're there for the money. There's lots of money being made there, right?
Sue,
and that's also a different culture, right?
Well, because the chief executive of Uber apparently told GQ magazine he calls his company not Uber but Boober because his wealth makes him attractive to women. And then the CEO of Snapchat 5 years ago in college sent emails to his frat brothers calling female students bitches and frigid and sorora sluts. So is this the tone that is being set at the top of some of these new and very rich companies?
Yeah, it's super interesting because both those guys I think are in their 20s. The guy who runs Uber might be in his 30s by now. Snapchat guy is I think 25 or 26 now, right? And he has said that he is mortified by those emails and the fact that they became public, right? And so to a certain extent you want to say we were all 23. I wasn't sending emails like that when I was 23, but I was 23. I think that when you have an ecosystem with a bunch of different players, right? So there's sort of pre-boom companies, pre-bust companies, you know, that are established and older, and they have much more predictable, careful, safe corporate cultures. But for sure, you've got companies run by brash young guys who are saying the things that some brash young guys say, right? Which are not ordinarily said by CEOs of companies, right? And I think that what is striking to me about Silicon Valley is that what you would ordinarily expect to happen is ordinarily you would also have counter messages, right? You would also have people who are a bit older, a bit more seasoned, a bit more experienced, maybe in oversight positions, board members.
Do we not have those people?
We have those people, and there is not a lot of pushback on that kind of message, which I do find surprising, right? Because I think that from the standpoint of very few people, right, are going to say that they like the level of sexism and misogyny in Silicon Valley, right? Ordinary engineers, many of them are mortified by it. They're embarrassed, right? They have kids, they have partners, like it is not a frat house, right? But what does not happen is there is not a lot of public speaking out, which is a shame because I think that is the kind of thing that does actually tip the balance, right? Some of the most powerful words in the English language are, we do not do that here, right? That is not for us. That is not what we are all about, right? And I think that if more people, especially men, because men have more power in that kind of, you know, conversation, right? Because a woman is saying, I am offended, I am hurt. A man has more social power when he's saying, I don't think that's okay, right? So I think one of the things that needs to happen is the good men of Silicon Valley, of whom there are many, right, need to kind of own their own authority a little bit better and kind of step up and say, we don't want this place to be like that, right?
But they haven't yet, and the result is, I'm using your words here, women are leaving the sector in droves. Is this, I mean, it's clearly inevitable, but does it appear to be, I mean, can you turn that around?
Well, it's extremely hard to turn around, right? So the percentage of women in the tech industry actually peaked in 1989. Most people don't know that, right? That was when the largest number of women were graduating with CS degrees. That's when the largest number of women worked as engineers in Silicon Valley. And it's been going down ever since. That's not what we think, right? Like we assume it's a long, slow climb towards equality. And when you look at the other STEM fields, if you look at mathematics or physics or any of the other science, engineering, technology, math fields, it is a slow climb towards equality. It's slower than we wish, right? But it is getting there.
But not in
Computer
tech.
science is the only place where it's going in the wrong direction. It's still going in the wrong direction now,
Why
right?
do you think women are not staying and fighting, as they have in many other sectors? They are instead voting with their feet and leaving.
It's a really good question, right? And I do think that some of it has to do with the tone at the top piece, right? that you need to at least make professions or assertions that you want things to be better for women, for them to want to stay, right? I did a survey a couple months ago of 1,600 women who work in tech. I did it via Twitter and Google Forms, and I asked them what risks them leaving and what would persuade them to stay, right? And the answers were consistent with all the other surveys. There have been hundreds of surveys done. There's lots of surveying of this has happened, right? My answers were consistent with the other answers. And what women say is they want to feel valued by their own company. And you can imagine that to be, it's your boss, it's your CEO, it's your HR, like who knows, right? But you want to feel valued. You want to feel like you are wanted, right? Women feel very isolated and very lonely because there are so few of them. There are lots of challenges. Older men, more senior men, as is the case in other fields too, do not want to mentor younger women because they don't want to risk being seen as predatory, right? Which I think is understandable, right? Their male colleagues may not loop women in to the weekend basketball game or the getting drunk on Friday night, and a lot of informal knowledge passes that way, right? You get better at your job. Like I know from when I was a journalist, right? We'd go out and talk shop. It was good for everybody learned, you got better faster. If as a woman you are uniquely, individually excluded from those conversations, not because people are hostile sexists, but for whatever, they don't want you to feel like they're hitting on you or like whatever reason, right? They just don't think of you that way. They assume you have somewhere better to go or whatever. When that happens, they end up lonely. They don't have professional networks. Their professional networks are weak. They are not strong, right? They don't get, there are no women to mentor and sponsor them. The men are afraid to mentor and sponsor them for fear of seeming predatory. And weirdly, uniquely, there are a lot of activities now, a lot of initiatives designed to get girls interested in coding. And so if you're a mid-career woman working in the tech industry, you are constantly called upon to behave as a kind of representative of your gender, right? And it's weird because, again, we're going back, these are tech women, right? So they're also women, like the men, who spend all their time on their computers working, communing with the machine, right? They're not public speakers, right? They're no more, that's not what they're drawn towards, most of them. But they find themselves constantly being asked to do public speaking, help their company with their recruiting efforts, coach little girls and teach them how to code, be involved on mailing lists where young women just starting out in their careers are looking for advice, right? And so they have this kind of double bind where they're trying to do their ordinary work, right, and get ahead in their own career, and yet they're getting pulled to do all this sort of like social work, right, that the men aren't. The men are able to focus on what they're doing.
Do you worry that if tech is the future and tech is overwhelmingly male, that women are going to be left behind the future?
I don't think about it as left behind, but I do worry a lot about that general problem, right? Because right now, really, Silicon Valley certainly, and the tech industry generally, is very much a monoculture, right? It's mostly white people, some Asian people, very majority male, quite young, et cetera, right? There's a libertarian streak, there's some sort of political sameness and so forth, right? So it's a monoculture. And I worry about that because it's an ethics issue, it's a fairness issue, et cetera, but tech, there's a famous saying in Silicon Valley, which is that software is eating the world, right? Software is everything. It's changing everything. Everything will be automated. Everything will be made easier. We're reshaping the world through the lens of code, right? If we don't have as broad a group of people involved in actually designing and shaping that world, right, it will reflect the interests of that little tiny monoculture. And we joke all the time in the Bay Area, like, I don't know, every week somebody launches a new app designed to make it easier for me to get a pizza at 3 in the morning, right? That is scratching your own itch, right? If you're a 25-year-old coder, like, that is what you want. You would like someone to pick up your dry cleaning, and you would like them to come and wash your car, and you would like them to bring you food, right? While you work at your desk, right? That works fine for me too. I'm actually pretty comfortable in that demographic, right? But that is not solving the problem of, I don't know, like elder care and what are we doing for people with Alzheimer's to make their lives better. It does not solve the problem of, how can we get kids engaged in social issues and learning history through games. There are all like a whole array of societal things that we would like technology to help us do, right? None of which is going to happen if it's really only that one lens that we're seeing the world through. And I have to say, like, Often in Silicon Valley, folks will say, you know, we are incredibly idealistic and we are transforming the world. We want to make it so much better. And I have to say, from my perspective, that rings increasingly hollow to me as the years pass. Even in the time that I have lived in the Bay Area, I've seen that become less true, right? It is very much, it's a machine for extracting money, right? Lots of people are getting super rich. That's completely fine. There's no problem with that, but it's not enough, right? This is not what we want the internet to be. This is not what we want technology to provide for us. There's so much more that we could ask for from it, right? And we can only get that if there's a really broad, diverse array of people contributing, including African Americans who are massively underrepresented, Latinas massively underrepresented, women. You know, there are just lots of people who we would like to have helping us design this new world.
We're really grateful that you would spare some time for us on this trip to come in and tell us all about it here at
Thank
TVO. Sue Gardner, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.